Welcome to this week's video series. One of the most critical roles that any coach has is creating change in their athletes. So understanding how change is created, understanding how your athletes, your student athletes actually manage that change process. There's a model that I always come back to. It's quite a simple model. And the purpose of this video today is to actually explain and articulate what the steps in the process is in this actual model. So we call this model the DVP model. And ultimately what we're describing here are three mechanisms, if you like, three key points that we have to hit on if we're going to create change in any of our student athletes, whether that change be focused on their technique, doing something different, or any other behavioural change that you may be, have in mind for that particular player. So if I explain these three elements, essentially the D stands for dissatisfaction. What's well accepted across any type of counselling or psychology is the fact that for people to change, they must firstly be dissatisfied with the current status quo. What that means for us as student athletes is that our current level of performance, if we think about our performance and we say, well, we're really happy with where we're at right now, the chances of change are pretty minimal. Because when people are satisfied, they try not to change things to actually improve things a real lot. The other key issue here is that when someone is satisfied, it can often have something to do with the fact that everybody has what we call a personal thermostat. And that thermostat is the same as the thermostat that keeps your air conditioning at a certain temperature. When an athlete sets their thermostat at whatever level it may be, the level of satisfaction is purely reliant on where that thermostat setting is. So you'll find that there are some athletes that set their thermostat level at the highest possible level, others set it at a much lower level. So those that set it at the highest level, they're often not satisfied with anything less than their absolute best performance. If it's off by 0.5%, they're dissatisfied and they want to do something about it. And so a critical role for us as coaches is to firstly establish, well, what is your student athlete's thermostat setting? Whether that's behaviourally or performance-wise, it's the same concept. For those, our challenge is always to slightly increase their thermostat setting so that they can aspire to a higher standard of performance or behaviour. And so what we're referring to here is that to create change, someone must be dissatisfied. Sometimes our role as a coach is to magnify that level of dissatisfaction. And so we can actually rate this out of 10. Often it's useful to say to one of your student athletes, so given your performance at this point, what would you rate it out of 10? Is a 7 out of 10 going to be enough level of dissatisfaction for them to do something different? Because we all know that doing something different is uncomfortable. And often people move away from doing things that are uncomfortable or things that are going to perceive them to be painful or perhaps frustrating. And so a 7 out of 10 may not do it. And so our role is to magnify that level of discomfort to perhaps an 8 or a 9. Once we've established a level of discomfort or dissatisfaction, the next purpose is to increase their level of vision. So what we're saying here is that for someone to change, they must be dissatisfied, but that's not enough. There are a lot of people that are dissatisfied with how their life is, but they don't change because they don't have a vision for how their life could be. It's the same as a student athlete may not have a vision for themselves as to how great their performance could be. And so when we're talking about a vision, we're talking about clearly articulating exactly how that athlete could be in the future. It could be a week away, it could be 2 weeks away, it could be by the end of the season. Our role as a coach is to often point a really clear picture and to paint that picture to the point where the athlete can absolutely see themselves performing at a higher level. I relate back to my own experiences as a young athlete when I was in high school. I lost basically every race that I went in. And a coach came up to me after my last race at school and he said that he had a vision for me. He said that, Bo, I can see you potentially being anything you want to be in the sport of rowing. I can see you participating, being part of the Australian Olympic team. You could be one of the best rowers Australia has ever seen. Now, I didn't believe it myself at that time, but he painted the initial brushstrokes, if you like, of a vision for myself. And because I trusted him and he was a credible person, I started to see more clearly that vision and started taking steps towards it. I was already dissatisfied because after losing every race, you want to experience a little bit of success. The next step after we've articulated and painted a clearer vision is that we have to have a process for getting there. There are people that are dissatisfied. They can even see how good it could be, but they often say, well, I got no idea how to get there. And so our role as a coach is to articulate a clear process. And the process starts with the first steps. So unless it's something that you can say to your athlete, right, the first thing you need to do is this. If it's 2 weeks away or a month away that they have to take action, the more immediate the action is, the more clear those first steps can be articulated and put into action literally. As soon as you have this conversation, the more likely it is that that athlete is going to take those necessary steps to improve their performance and achieve that vision. Now, the key thing with this model is that each of these elements that we've described so far, the dissatisfaction, the vision, and the process, they are all multiplied by each other, and I'll come back to that as to why that's the case. But these three elements have to multiply to be greater than what we call the RC, which is the resistance to change. For whatever reason, a lot of people have some level of resistance to change. Some people have such a high level of resisting change, it's like moving an immovable object. It literally requires an enormous amount of force. It requires an enormous amount of spelling out that dissatisfaction, painting a clear vision for the future, giving them a quality process in order to get them to shift. And once that momentum has started, once that initial inertia has been overcome, they start shifting in the direction that you want them to go. But that initial push can often be a lot. For some others, it's not much at all. And a lot of it does depend on where their thermostat setting is. So we come back to why they're multiplied and not just plus. It goes back to some of the things that I was talking about before. People can be dissatisfied. You could even be 10 out of 10 dissatisfied with your current level of performance, yet if you don't have a clear vision for the future and how good things could be, if that perhaps was a 0 out of 10, anything multiplied by 0 is 0. You could even have a process, but if you don't believe in that process, then no change is going to occur. You know, you may have a very clear vision, you may even be dissatisfied, but once again, if the steps involved in creating that change are not clear, if they don't seem like they're possible to do, or you don't have the resources or the time or the energy or the commitment to do it, then no change will take place. And so when we look at this equation, we are getting you to think about, well, what's our level of dissatisfaction out of 10? We multiply that by the clarity of our vision, and then we multiply that by the clarity of our plan and our process. If there is something at least, if there is at least 7 or 8 out of 10 in each of those elements, we stand a really good chance of being able to overcome whatever inertia it is in order to push that athlete in the direction that they want to go.